From the station putting local first, this is KTSM 9 News Special, clearing the air, marking the 20th anniversary of Asarco shutting down for good.
Perhaps one of the most iconic landmarks in El Paso between the early 1890s to 2013 is one that no longer exists, but in the memory of those who lived in its presence for decades. Now, 20 years after the American Smelting and Refining Company closed, we take a look back at the legacy of Asarco, starting with one of the most memorable moments in El Paso's modern history.
Getting ready to go down, yeah.
I've been passing by that Asarco tower for years and years, and the last few days I've been taking extra long gazes at it because I know it's not going to be there for very long.
On the morning of April 13, 2013, El Pasoans rose before dawn to hike atop hills, climb rooftops, and snatch parking spots across the street on the UTEP campus.
And so once in a lifetime experience just to see the event. It's just seeing the enormity.
Hundreds of acres of land between the Rio Grande and UTEP marked the spot. Two beaming towers guiding the crowd.
It's kind of sad.
It is sad.
Yeah,
I'm sad.
Yeah.
I like seeing it. It's part of El Paso.
Yeah, you coming from the west side, or you going out of, going out west,
It's going to look strange without it.
Yeah, it's going to bear.
Some camping out to wake up to its sight one last time.
Met some cool people here last night. We talked and just kind of fellowshipped, had a couple of brews. It was fun last night, and seeing all these people here today, it's like, wow.
Demolition slated for 6:45 that Saturday morning. 2 loud blasts, 300 pounds of dynamite, bringing both of the smokestacks down in less than 30 seconds.
What do you think?
Big bang.
Yeah.
I think El Paso lost a fantastic landmark.
Wow, it was pretty spectacular. As a matter of fact, I had to watch it in high definition while I was filming it with my camera. I didn't want to miss that memory, of it actually coming down and seeing the smaller tower break in two halfway down. It was amazing.
Out of the 2 smokestacks on the Asarco land, the one most vividly remembered is the white and red striped tower with the letters Asarco vertically painted in black. The copper stack was once considered the 3rd highest smokestack in the U.S., standing at 828 feet tall. It was built in 1966 at a cost of $1,293,000. The second chimney was the lead stack, standing at about 610 feet. It cost $174,359 to construct. A third and much smaller but older 300-foot chimney was the zinc stack, built in 1917 for $18,522. During its 100 years of operation in El Paso, the ERM says Asarco's 3 stacks smelted lead, zinc, arsenic, cadmium, and copper. What was taken down in half a minute took years to build and grow, not only here in El Paso, but internationally. In 1887, Robert Safford Town established the El Paso Smelter with backing from the Kansas City Consolidated Smelting and Refining Company on a 1,156 acres of land. In 1899, mining claims in Colorado, Montana, and Texas were consolidated to become the American Smelting and Refining Company, the birth of a company that would, over time, grow to be known worldwide, predominantly in the U.S., Mexico, and Peru. It wasn't until 1910 that Asarco's history would begin in El Paso with the construction of the copper smelter. In 1999, as the Asarco company celebrated a century of operations while in El Paso, the copper smelter suspended its operations. And that suspension was the beginning of an intense battle to close the smelter for good. An El Paso landmark now at risk of coming to an end because elected officials at the time believe there were more who were at risk than Asarco itself.
I mean, we have people who moved to El Paso within the last 20 years who don't even know about the smokestacks. And I imagine they would be surprised if they knew that we had a smelter right in the middle of the 22nd largest city in the United States.
In 1999, former El Paso Mayor John Cook voted into office as a city rep, as Asarco's operating permit was in limbo amid environmental concerns.
I can remember being a student at UTEP. I graduated in '77, and sometimes you'd come out. I went to school sometimes in the evening, and I'd come out and I'd clean my windshield, and it would be yellow, an orange-yellow film. because the wind had brought everything from Asarco and deposited that orange and yellow stuff was sulfur.
The holdup, the results of scientific environmental studies.
We had meetings with the folks from Asarco trying to convince us that the facility was state-of-the-art and it never contributed to any pollution, that there was no hazards, that the smoke was clean when it came out.
Cook says the city of El Paso spent more than $1 million fighting the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality.
We ran into a lot of problems, one of them being the TCEQ was one of the biggest advocates for keeping it open. So we actually felt like we as a governmental entity, and even Senator Shapley as a governmental representative, were fighting the system, which was trying to protect Asarco from being shut down.
What really irked people was the sulfur dioxide, which rained down in this neighborhood and caused cars to lose their paint.
Former El Paso State Rep. Elliot Shapley.
Asarco polluted Juarez, it polluted Anapra, it polluted parts of the lower valley all the way to Isleta. The plume would go down there. But because of the updraft near this mountain, Mount Franklin, what happened was all of these neighborhoods that were close by got really polluted.
Shapley tells me his home was one of the hundreds cleaned up by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, at a cost of $4,300 a yard.
Oh man, the smell like rotten eggs. I mean, right now you don't have any smell here, right? But back then, if you're playing tennis at the Arroyo, at the tennis club or anything else, people wouldn't come to tournaments here because they didn't want to choke on the air. To breathe the air was to really get sick.
Shapley remembers 600 people bussed to Austin to dispute granting Asarco an air permit in 2008. A permit which, according to Shapley, would allow the smelter to emit 4.7 tons of lead and more than 6,000 tons of sulfur dioxide into the borderland sky.
We said, how is El Paso going to compete? UTEP going to compete? How are we going to bring talent back to El Paso that have moved from El Paso when we have a lead smelter right in the middle of our community? I mean, Silicon Valley doesn't have that.
In the end, it was the EPA that ended Asarco in the borderland. A miracle, Shapley says, changed El Paso forever.
Look at this beautiful town. Back then, you couldn't even see it. Back in the day, you couldn't even see it. And look at El Paso High. They're playing soccer down there, which takes a lot of running and a lot of fitness. And already they've started the soccer season down there. That's how wonderful it is that Asarco is no longer here.
In March 2009, Asarco began pulling back on its efforts to try to reopen the historic smelter, the company filing for bankruptcy in an economic downturn. The same year, the International Smelting Company announced it would no longer try reopening in El Paso. Synonymous with the word Asarco is Smelter Town, and just as it sounds, it was the name of the town within the grounds of El Paso's smelting company.
It was a pretty nice little town. Everybody knew everybody.
Near the banks of the Rio Grande and in the shadows of the Asarco smokestacks, Smelter Town.
Most of them were like apartments right next to it with the wall in between.
From credit unions to grocery stores, Smelter Town was where many families of Asarco workers were born and raised.
No paved streets, a lot of small alleys. And they had all kinds of stores like bakery, barbershops.
Manuel Flores remembers there being about 400 houses. He was 19 when high levels of lead were found in blood samples of children living near the smelter in 1972.
Since I lived there, I already had lead on my blood.
The same year, his community was forced to move out.
I was born right there in Asarco, right inside the plant.
Vicente Aguirre Sr. can still picture Smelter Town. White-collar workers, those with seniority, living in la parte alta of the community. Blue-collar workers living in la parte baja.
It took some time to get gas into the community, to get water into the community. Otherwise, you had an outhouse.
Almost 50 years later, no remnants of Smelter Town can be found, except for this, rows of graves atop a hill known as Calavera Cemetery.
You miss it. You reminisce on stuff like that. You go back, think about it, but you can't go back really because it's not there no more. But it was a wonderful life.
Living in Smelter Town largely influenced the art of those who live there. Like this, a poem by Santiago González Aragon. It reads in part, "Bless my father's soul on down the acid road, Asarco, that sucks the years from his life and blows the waste into the sky from a smokestack a mile high." Former Senator Elliot Shapley, the owner of an original Smelter Town window painting, with a similar story.
And if you look at the art from that time frame, there were window panes that people painted with the calavera coming out of the smokestack, which was the third highest in the world at that time. And over on, right in the mountain right behind it, Cristo Rey, there's Jesus. So Jesus is there to protect them from Asarco.
Many of the Asarco residents who were moved out relocated to the nearby Buena Vista neighborhood. Smelter Town was later cleared out by employees to become a baseball field for them to use. Although children and women lived in Smelter Town, those who actually worked in Asarco were predominantly men. That is, until 1941, when the men were sent to fight in World War II and women took on jobs at Asarco. This is a photo of about 40 of those women at the El Paso smelter. Former employees telling us when they came back from the war, only one of them, named Tilly, continued to work at Asarco. Although traces of contaminants have been found, there have yet to be any proven links from Asarco's pollutants to the illnesses that plague some of the company's former employees. Those stories documented by 2 local educators.
Around the 1970s, El Paso was the most heavily polluted city in the nation. Just about. It had some of the highest levels of air pollutants.
A plea from a group of former Asarco employees united an El Paso School District principal and retired UTEP professor on a journey into an avalanche of research.
We spoke to the men. We knew that their stories were rich. We knew that they had something to say. And so what a better way than to share their voice.
They wanted to know why anyone would put their lives at risk for a job. The reason? Copper stain.
Growing up without an education or college education, men could find a trade and get paid very well. And so for many years they manufactured and smeltered copper.
Asarco's location, no coincidence, according to the authors. The land in between what is now UTEP and Ciudad Juarez was considered the outskirts of town, away from development and rich in many ways.
Because we're a border town, and while the research says that usually entities like Asarco will go to places that are low socioeconomic.
A deeper dive showing a political air surrounding Asarco.
Asarco wasn't particularly unique. Our nation, as an industrial nation, gave all the benefits to industry. So industries could do anything they wanted to, as long as they produced the metals that we all demand.
A booming industry that took years to regulate.
It's very difficult to prove that one kind of a pollutant will cause a certain kind of disease, because every person is different and every pollution level is different.
The towers came down almost 6 years ago with a history almost as extensive as the one the copper smelter held in El Paso, and that battle continues to this day. Here are some of the stories of the men in copper stain.
The first day that I went in the graveyard shift, and I was walking into the assigned area. Somebody was walking me there, and really I thought my dad had sold me to the devil. There was fire everywhere.
In 1975, then 22-year-old Daniel Arellano walked into his new job at Asarco, the El Paso smelter, where he'd work first in the copper area, then in the acid plants. A third-generation Asarco employee.
My dad and my grandfather and about 20 uncles and cousins.
With 24 years under his belt, Daniel says the job never got easier or safer.
Where the converters, this building in one of the processes of the copper, that it blew up #1 converter. And the guy was up here in the second level on the other side. And we had to bring him down and take him to the clinic, and he was injured pretty bad.
With the exception of a twisted ankle from getting caught on the copper charges, Arellano says he managed to walk out in one piece at the end of every shift.
I was starting to show a blood disorder in 1997, and when they closed down, I was still going. And after they closed down, I was diagnosed at MD Anderson in Houston that I had a pre-leukemia, environmentally induced.
An illness Arellano says began with dozens of small tumors sprouting around his arms. and igniting an activist from within.
A lot of the workers wanted their jobs back there, and I was fighting to not reopen the plant anymore because of hazardous waste that we had found out they had gone through without the company letting us know. From the military and NASA, DuPont, a bunch of companies went in there and just brought to burn their waste through the El Paso Asarco.
A few blocks away,
my dad worked there, and my brother worked there. Actually, my older brother did too, but he didn't like it. He got out. He was the only smart one.
a similar story within the walls of Carlos Rodriguez's East Side home. He worked 30 years at Asarco.
I went in to production, heavy labor, industrial labor. Como decían los señores, hombres de acero.
Men of steel, they were called.
One death is too many. And in this case, on the chemical exposures, there's several deaths. There's more deaths under toxic chemicals than there were accidents.
Years after Asarco's flame was extinguished, Rodriguez says he developed health complications.
Open the door, me pega, bruise.
The medications for it causing these bruises, a daily reminder of why they keep fighting.
I look fine, but I'm not. You know, it's all inside.
Coming up, Asarco proud why despite environmental and health concerns, some former employees continue to stand by the company. Then, the light at the end of the tower, a look inside these smokestacks before they were demolished. And beyond the stacks, where plans for the land which once belonged to Asarco stand now. The health studies that came back positive for lead in the 1970s stained Asarco's reputation to this day. But there remains a group still loyal to Asarco in spite of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I started in 1969, August
the 29th, 1972.
In 1974, September 27th.
Etched into their minds their first day at the El Paso smelter. Decades later, the exact date burned into their memory.
I was going in there to the plant and there was a large explosion. And I saw some workers there full of dust and with those big respirators, and I was single, so I said, no, that's not for me.
But something eventually pulled him back, and for the next 25 years, he worked at Asarco.
The work was hard. I'm not gonna say it wasn't, but the pay was very good. It provided for my family to buy a house.
This group of former smelter workers still believe their lives would be much different if Asarco still existed.
Asarco! Overall, nothing to say about Asarco except grateful for giving me the opportunity to work there.
A job that was exhausting, dangerous.
It was really incredible, you know, that we made it, because sometimes that converter, it just spills back and everything got burned.
Where employees felt recognized and appreciated.
First thing in the morning, there's burritos for breakfast.
We had safety regulations that we had to abide all 20 years there. We had to follow them. We had to follow them. Aside from that, 25-year club. They would give us things for just being there, being loyal to a big company.
Regardless of not having a college education.
When I started, it was about $80 a week. Then being a supervisor, it went up more. You know, if it was overtime and everything, about 1,000, 800, 700.
So when an environmental scandal began encircling Asarco, some employees standing up for the company.
I used to wear all the safety equipment, what to tell you, what to wear and everything.
We had a bathhouse, and the company would provide for us pants and jackets. So we had a clean side and we had a dirty side.
Because when those towers came down, so did the fruit of their labor.
It's a very hard process finding, extracting metals and minerals from the earth and making them so people can use them.
I'm Asarco proud.
The camaraderie formed at Asarco continues the second Thursday of every month at the Firs on Zaragoza. That's where former Asarco employees have been meeting to catch up for the past couple of years. Up next, paving the way from contaminants found in soil and water as a result of El Paso smelter, plus remediation intervention. What will happen to the land known as Asarco? This is a photograph of Asarco's copper smokestack taken by a former employee after talks of Asarco closing down began.
The man who was the executor of the Asarco place was hoping that they would be able to keep just the base of a tower as a memorial. However, that did not happen, and I know insurance had an awful lot to do with it. It was an old 50-year-old tower made of old bricks, and it had been burned, and it had horrible pollution inside.
Others were concerned the towers would collapse if El Paso were to ever experience an earthquake. The aftermath of 100 years of smelting and, of course, demolition left 450 acres of contaminated soil, groundwater to the company in charge of the cleanup, Arcadis. As per the TCEQ, under Asarco's bankruptcy settlement, the smelter was placed under an environmental custodial trust managed by Project Navigator Ltd. That's the company managing the remediation of the land. The custodial trustee, Roberto Puga, tells me the project is 95% complete. Asarco's custodial trustee says the land is currently in the process of being sold to UTEP. A spokesperson for the university tells us no deal has been made yet. That does it for our special on the 20th anniversary of Asarco closing. With photojournalist Johnny Munoz, I'm Estefania Seyfert.